Previously, I have mentioned the Spreeinsel and how it is the location of the royal palace, which was placed approximately at its centre. The palace occupies the site just above the red marker on this particular map, and opposite this site lies the Berliner Dome. Immediately to the east, on the other side of the river, is the Marx-Engels Forum. To the west is Unter den Linden, on the other side of the Spree Canal, where the Humboldt University is indicated. The Schloss, or the palace, existed in various forms over the centuries, but here's a view of the Schloss in the 20th century, seen from the west. The feature jutting out into the Spree Canal is the memorial to Kaiser Wilhelm I. This memorial was demolished after the last war, and only the base remains, on which there are plans to erect a memorial to freedom and unity. I express those three words in apostrophes, although there is opposition to this concept. Of the statues in the original memorial, all were destroyed except for a couple featuring lions, which now stand appropriately before the big cat house in the Tierpark in Lichterfelde. And there's also a statue of an eagle, which is now in the Marxisches Museum. And this is an aerial view. The Lustgarten would be to the right, while to the left is the Palastplatz behind the palace itself. The building to the left on the far side of Palastplatz is the Marstall, i.e. the stables, which stretches down Breiterstrasse, which is the road shown to its right, a road which leads down to the traditional centre of Cologne. During the DDR period, the old palace was demolished and replaced by the Palast der Republik, which occupied the western side of the site. This shows the Palast der Republik and the view towards Alexanderplatz. This Palast der Republik has now itself been demolished, but not without great controversy. It is not too fanciful to consider the purely ideological motives were in play. Initially, they wanted to demolish it because of asbestos, despite there being a building in Charlottenburg likewise afflicted, which was not slated for demolition. The palace was eventually gutted and it looked like it might be saved, but it turned out, obviously, that it wasn't. The controversy was heightened by the plan to reconstruct the former Hohenzollern Palace on the site, as though that was something to be proud of. This banner says, "Halt the demolition of the Palast." There are certainly more nuances to this whole issue. The powers that be like to talk a lot about democracy, but in line with what I've just said, this can be nuanced. Certainly a capitalist regime like Nazi Germany was most certainly not democratic, and the Hohenzollern were never supporters of the concept. It is worth noting that during the overthrow of the Paris Commune, there was wide-scale destruction of the city, which was soon rebuilt, but they most certainly did not rebuild the royal palace of the Tuileries. France was now a republic, and they had no need of a royal palace. This is the palace as rebuilt, officially functioning as a museum under the name of Humboldt Forum. However, the eastern side adjacent to the river has not been constructed in the former style. In the confusing period after the First World War, the palace actually became a base for the Volksmarine Division, a revolutionary unit having its origins in the group of sailors who mutinied in Kiel from the 9th of November, forcing the hand of the government to call a halt to the war. The palace became their command office while the troops were billeted in the Marstall. This shows one of their machine guns in the Palastplatz between the two buildings. The fountain they are up against the Neptunbrunner, has now been located further east, near to the Marienkirche. This shows the Palastplatz in more detail. The palace to the left, the Marstall to the right. In the centre of the picture, in the background, is the tower of the Rathaus. The ambiguous and confusing events immediately after the war flared into a major disturbance on December 24th, 1918. The government was composed of members of the SPD and a more socialist party, the USPD, and the revolutionary Volksmarine Division existed alongside the official army, if I can call it that, which tended to be remnants of imperial troops from the war and composed of increasingly right-wing elements, as if they didn't have enough of a right-wing characteristic to start with. The sailors had been denied their pay, and while they were demanding this, the government had decided to order the army to oust the sailors from the palace. The army tried to do this on December 24th, and the outcome is often described as some sort of victory for the sailors, with many members of the public joining in on their side. And there are also claims that some members of the army switched sides as well. About 50 people died allegedly, no exact records exist. The picture shows the palace. Nevertheless, the division was forced to evacuate the palace and Marstall. Resentment still lingered. The USPD left the government and on New Year's Eve joined with the Spartacist League and others to form the KPD, the Communist Party. A meeting on the 5th of January, nominally concerned with the refusal of the police president to step down because of his support for the sailors, was attended by larger than expected crowds. And to cut a long story short, the momentum led to a full-scale uprising between the 7th and the 11th of January, which is often referred to as the Spartacus Revolution, but as with many events during this period, the situation is a bit more complicated. This is the former State Council building to the west of the palace, which prominently displays a reconstruction of a piece of the old palace said to represent the balcony from which Karl Liebknecht declared the Socialist Republic in 1918, a story which is unlikely to be true. East of the River Spree, Marx-Engels Forum still exists under that name. It was comparatively easy for the powers to be to get rid of streets named after Bazarin, the Soviet commander of Berlin, or Lenin, but harder for them to get rid of homegrown names. Nevertheless, the recent extension to the U5 Underground Railway saw an emergence of an excuse to try and get rid of the Marx-Engels Forum. The responsible and official line is to try and equate Marx and Engels with anti-democratic creeds, which would be quite amazing if true, given that Marx and Engels spent some time within the Chartist movement in Britain. Right from the beginning of his stay in Britain, Marx had worked with the Chartist Ernest Jones, who had spent some time in prison for his beliefs. The two were able to communicate in Deutsch because Jones was born in Berlin as the son of a father in the service of Ernst Augustus, a son of George III of Britain, who lived in Berlin for a long period. Ernst Augustus became the last king of Hanover, incidentally. Personally, I'm not too bothered about statues, and I think there are far too many of them anyway, but I'm led to believe that these statues have a higher status than those all too numerous statues that don't warrant a second look. I was trying to find a picture of children playing on them as though they were objects in a playground, but I'm led to believe that that does go on. Something similar also happens to the statue of Käthe Kollwitz in Prenzlauer Berg, which I consider to be an advantage personally. This is different to the 19-metre high statue of Lenin, which is basically just ridiculous, but still attracted some opposition during its demolition. I get the feeling also that Lenin himself would have found this statue ridiculous as well. It can easily be argued that the regime in the DDR was akin to the French Revolution in that it wasn't given a fair crack of the whip. I often wonder about how much about Marx was actually taught in the East. Did they notice the contradiction between Marx's ideas and features of life in the DDR, or was it a bit like some people deal with contradictions in the Bible? Again, if you have any constructive ideas on this particular aspect, you can leave them in the comments. Facing both palaces was the dome. This picture does actually show the Palace de la Republic as well. Dome is usually translated as cathedral, but this building is just a large church. It is not the seat of a bishop. And to the west of the dome is the Alters Museum, which fronts the Marx-Engels behind it. Although nowadays the Humboldt Forum tends to be considered as a part of the Museumsinsel as well. The area in the foreground is the Lustgarten. Unter den Linden lies on the other side of the Spreeinsel and runs away from the location of the palace. This is the Neue Wache, which was originally a guardhouse for the palace. And just to finish off, here's a picture of the Neue Wache in DDR times. The building in the background is the Zeughaus, one of the oldest buildings in Berlin. That is, if we are to date it from its time of original construction. Most of the buildings on the Unter den Linden are actually reconstructions built after the last war. And I can just give a mention at the end to my book, Berlin, an A to Z compendium. If you go to the website mentioned here, you can get details of how to get hold of it. Thanks for listening anyway. Cheers for now.